From the studio at Allied headquarters, this is The Allied Angle, where we take an in-depth look at current market trends with industry experts. I'm your host, Amber Guthrie with Allied Solutions. Today, we're diving into a hot topic facing FIs right now. So hot, we are even making this a two-part episode, and that's integration. Legacy systems, fragmented data, and the pressure to modernize without blowing up what already works. And increasingly, AI is entering that conversation in a big way. To help us unpack it all, I'm excited to welcome Jon Fancey, Chief Technology Officer at PortX, a platform purpose-built for financial institutions that's helping redefine what modern integration really looks like. Jon is the kind of CTO who can make a genuinely complex topic feel approachable, and that's exactly what we need today. Jon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Just to let our listeners know just a little bit about you before we get started. Jon is a seasoned technology leader with deep expertise in application and data integration. He previously led streaming connectivity and tools at Confluent after creating Azure integration services at Microsoft. With 2 decades of experience in consulting, architecture, and product strategy, Jon now serves as Chief Technology Officer at PortX, where he's focused on applying AI-powered cloud-native platforms to solve complex integration challenges for banks, credit unions, and fintechs. Jon, that is quite impressive. Before we really dive in, though, we want to know the lighter side about you in what we call the Allied Angle Accelerated Q&A. Just a couple of quick
awesome.
Questions.
Yeah.
So, Jon, you ready?
I think so.
All right. Question number 1. What is the best concert you have ever been to?
Maroon 5. I've seen them 3 times.
Oh, where at?
Vegas and Seattle twice. I went to 25th wedding anniversary, went to Vegas a couple of years ago.
Oh, I bet that was fun.
It's great.
That's a good one. Number 2, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I think I wanted to do this, which sounds really sad, but I've had a lifetime of learning doing it, and it's been a lot of fun.
So tech has always been your thing?
Always been my thing since I was about 11 years old and got my first computer.
Oh, I mean, it's not going away anytime soon, so
Doesn't look like it.
That was a good journey.
Yeah.
A very important question, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Do you have a dog?
2.
What kind?
Got a Labradoodle and a Cavapoo. Yes.
Big and little?
Yes.
Very much so.
Yeah, except the little one thinks she's bigger than the big one.
Don't they always?
You know what I mean?
I think they always, it always works that way.
Yeah.
All right, and our last question, from family, friends, or an old boss, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Yeah, I don't know. I usually use my dad as a good reference for this. He gave me lots of good advice when I was younger. I've been doing this a long time, as mentioned, including like being a games programmer when I was a teenager. And I think follow your heart is probably the best piece of advice he gave me.
It's simple, but so true. All right, well, now we can get into what we are here for today. So, Jon, let's start at the beginning. You speak with FI leaders regularly, I'm assuming. And when you're having those conversations, what does the integration problem really look like on the ground? And what's the pain point that tends to surprise you the most?
The challenge is really the intersection of technology and business, right? I think a lot of people look at things from one point of view or the other, and it's actually really hard to put the two things together because a lot of organizations have older technology that's less flexible than what they see as kind of, what they would replace it with. But at the same time, they have very real business problems. So it's kind of how you fit those two things together and actually solve real problems with technology that are really the biggest issue that I see people facing, because that comes down to the reality of time, budgets, and people to solve those problems.
Do you find it where people that are more business-minded are having to be more tech-minded as well? Where before they didn't have to, they could just put that into the IT department and not worry about it. But now AI is affecting everybody. So now this is something they have to think about?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. I think simply because customers themselves think that way too, right? I think the days have gone where you could separate these two things entirely. I think every organization is at some level a technology company as well, because every company is employing technology to deliver services to its customers at this point. I think 20 years ago, you could probably argue that, we're on a journey. I think we've arrived at the destination that every customer, every consumer expects some digital experience on top of the services they're consuming, whether it's an app in their pocket or something more sophisticated.
FIs have been talking about modernization for well over a decade, yet so many are still stuck. Legacy cores, fragmented data, point-to-point integrations. All of these are not new problems. What made them tolerable for so long, and what's changed that, making the status quo unsustainable right now?
It's always true that like things are moving faster now. But I think that's been true for 50 years. Mm-hmm. I think they continue to accelerate, and I think the challenges continue to grow, right? And I think going back to your previous question around technology and business, I think the problem is if the technology is inflexible, you can't move at the speed of business. And that becomes an inhibitor and a risk to the organization, right? Why is it a problem now? Well, I think AI is probably what's focusing people on why it's a bigger problem now than it was 5 years ago, because we're now in a situation where the feeling is that other people can move faster. And we're not all moving at the same rate, more or less, anymore. And some organizations can move more quickly than others, and they can capitalize on opportunities more quickly than others. And that's, again, business risk.
Mm-hmm. When it comes specifically to integration and data workflows, where is AI delivering real measurable value today versus where it's still mostly a talking point?
Well, I think there's been a lot of talk around even attempting to accurately measure ROI on AI specifically. And I hate one of the metrics that I hate, because people have hated this for a long time and just brought it back, is kind of lines of code, right? Mm-hmm. It's like AI is extremely good at generating code. So let's all use that as a primary metric, because now engineers, developers can generate more code than they could write by hand. So let's use that because it makes them look more productive. I think it's completely the wrong way of looking at this. It's like quality still matters, not quantity, right? So what AI gives you is the ability to provide or generate high quality code, and a lot of it, right? I think that's really the journey we're all on right now, because it's very easy to generate thousands of lines of code that could be substituted by 50 lines of code if you actually wrote it yourself, right? That's the reality we're in right now. But fundamentally, if you get good at it, the productivity gains are massive. But like measuring that, I think is a work in progress, if I'm honest, in terms of what you're spending, the time it's taking, and what you get back. I think everyone's learning to be an expert in using this technology, and I think most people are not there yet.
But you have to find, is it just trying to find that fine line and that balance of being able to use it, but use it well, so you still have that quality over quantity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like anything, it's a tool, right? I think it's easy to personify it and kind of look at it as a helper. Increasingly, that will evolve and mature. But very much today, what a lot of people are doing with AI, kind of document generation, other kind of light kind of automation tasks, is more of a helper, an assistant, than actually running the company for you, right? Again, maybe that will change in the future. Who knows? It's become easier for people to get their heads around the disruption on their own terms of what parts of people's jobs they quite like to get rid of, because it's the same every time. It's kind of manual toil, basically, right? And actually giving that up and to these tools versus kind of the existential issues of some of the more complex parts of what it is actually involved in running a company, right? Or a business, even any function in that company.
So one of the biggest costs in traditional integration has been the dependency on highly specialized developers. How is AI starting to shift that, and what does it mean for institutions that have struggled to attract and retain that kind of tech talent?
Yeah, again, I see this as having almost like the word seasoned in my bio is just like it's kind of a substitute for the word old in some ways. I've seen a lot of changes over the last 30 years or so that I've been doing this. There's always been a shortage of talent. I think it's just that's not going to go away. I have no good answer for that other than try to retain your best people, because they're your best people, and you should have been trying to do that anyway, right? The fact it may have more impact if your best people leave now is just more of a problem on top of the problem you already had. The kind of legacy kind of problem and the challenge with integration itself and the complexity in requiring specialist people, I don't know whether that's going to get easier, because what's happening is the tech is getting more complex, right? Again, one of the realities today is it's actually pretty hard to understand probabilistic models like Gen AI and why they decide to do the things that they do. So the complexity is actually increasing to beyond the point that most people could even understand how the decisions are being made. So I think the explainability side of this is going to be a big deal, particularly for banks in regulated industries who need to explain to others how the thing did what it did, right? Bringing that back to the talent conversation, though, I think everyone's learning right now. There are very few experts. Most of the experts are working in this space itself instead of working, at end organizations. So it becomes a maturity question as much as anything else. Do
you foresee, with the excitement around AI, that more people will go into the tech field and maybe there will be a larger talent pool to pull from?
That's another interesting question. I've got a kid in college right now who's doing CS, and talking to the college themselves, and everyone's asking them the same question: is that the best career path? My teenager or whatever should be pursuing right now, because 5 years ago it seemed like a really safe bet. 10 years ago it seemed like a really safe bet. Now it's like the narrative is around replacing people with AI, replacing the art of coding with AI. I don't think that's the right way to look at it at all.
Again, it's still a tool and not a replacement.
Yeah, and it will evolve and it become, in many cases it's gone beyond a tool. But I kind of, some people look at it from the point of view of having, looking at an organization and saying, maybe it's 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 50,000 people, and figuring out how many people you need to run the organization, and worrying about when's my organization going to be the next one to have the headline grabbing reductions. I kind of look at it the other way. It's like there's got to be a minimum number of people that you actually need to run any organization, right? Simply because the kind of act of communicating with one another and figuring out what to do and what to get these tools to do is actually a job too. Do you know what I mean? I think that in some ways has taken a back seat to what's happening kind of now, because these are the things you do because people don't need to tell you how to do your job. You know how to do your job. Now you have to explain to something else and get that to figure out how to do your job should you wish to do that. It's like it's a little silly to look at this as being like, companies will just be run autonomously by hordes of agents, right? I think we're a long way off of that. And I think what ultimately that will translate into, jobs will change and be doing things that have more nuance to them and more kind of change and more sort of decision-making, more depth of insights into things they could do that they could never get to because they were doing all the busy work and the things that I talked about earlier. And just kind of that's a good thing, right? Fundamentally, it's like I think we're going to be able to do things that were never possible because we never managed to prioritize them because we're just too busy getting the stuff done that needed to be done at that point in time. One other way I kind of like to look at this is kind of we may be entering this sort of age of perfect software or perfect anything, honestly, right? You look at any kind of team's backlog of work that they have to do, and it's never ending, right? So it always comes down to what are the top 20 things we're going to try and do this quarter? What are we going to knock off the list? And meanwhile, we just keep talking to more customers. We keep doing more things. We keep thinking of new ideas and we keep adding those to the backlog. And it just becomes this never-ending to-do list. I heard stories of some organizations burning through their backlogs and running out of things to do, right? But it's like, you got to question whether you should ever get to the end of the backlog anyway, because if things are at the bottom and they've been there for years, they probably aren't worth doing it anyway, right? So again, it's just the wrong kind of framing for when you think about these problems.
AI-powered integration platforms are starting to reduce project timelines dramatically, which we were kind of just talking about. But what's actually enabling that acceleration? And beyond speed, are we seeing improvements in accuracy and reliability too? Or is there a trade-off?
I think the answer is yes. Fundamentally, so what is changing in integration? So again, this is it's all a journey, right? So 20 years ago, the first integration platforms were kind of created. And what I mean by that is before people were using an integration solution to sort of integrate different disparate systems together, people were doing point-to-point, which wasn't even called point-to-point because there was no alternative. So there didn't need to be a term for it, which is the idea that you just connect two things together. And today, there's a lot of kind of connecting your core to your digital banking platform, right, directly. There was some recognition 20 years ago that a lot of this point-to-point integration was kind of the same every time. When you look at it from a vendor's point of view, who's building an integration platform, building anything, right, building a word processor like Microsoft Office, it's just like a lot of people seem to be doing the same thing, right? So people start filling that space with general purpose solutions that can do it better, right? Because it's kind of nuts for everyone to build their own Microsoft Word or Excel, right? But it's just as crazy for people to build their own integration platforms or even do point to point, because the fact is a lot of people are doing the same work connecting to the same systems. So there becomes a commonality that you can take advantage of and actually improve productivity. So that's kind of where we were at 20 years ago. And what that's evolved into is a set of tools, like a toolbox. Most integration platforms, and PortX's was no different, is a set of integration tools that are intended to save time, be productivity. So what are those things? There's usually 3 or 4 different things. There's the connectivity to the disparate set of applications and data sources, right? Databases and other data sources, the banking cores, obviously, and other things. Then there's some level of mapping, right? Because these different applications are written by different organizations at different times, and they use different formats. Some of them are file-based, batch-based. Some of them are kind of real-time APIs, but they don't talk to one another is the point. So you put something in the middle that knows how to translate from one to the other. And then there's this aspect, which is the piece that's really changing now of kind of orchestration or workflow, where there's a set of steps, which is essentially the codification of a business process that takes these mappings of these different systems connected together and actually makes them talk to one another to get something done. Right? Maybe it's opening a new account, funding it for a customer in a bank or something like that. And then there's some element of reporting on the back of that so you can look retrospectively at what happened. So what is AI doing to that and why is that driving productivity? Because a lot of this was in itself, again, kind of manual labor, right? Actually doing the mapping exercise of converting from some flat file format to XML or JSON or something else is actually pretty tedious. Like, I don't think a lot of people I talk to are unhappy about kind of giving that up. And that's been one of the first things that we've invested in just automating that work. Because what usually happens is you need somebody with a business domain experience to understand the different formats, what all these fields mean, the ranges of those fields, and actually add the business understanding to be able to do that mapping at all. And actually then the mapping itself becomes a specification of how to convert one to the other that you can just feed into a tool and get it to do it for you. So it's kind of, again, comes down to like people just sort of tend towards zero on this thing. You go, well, no one's going to do mapping anymore. It's like, no, the business knowledge is the thing that always drove the mapping. And that is at the beginnings of being captured by these tools, but we're nowhere near the end of that, right? Because you've got to take what's in people's heads and some of that kind of institutional knowledge that people know how to do these things because they've been doing it forever and train, these systems to be able to do that. But in the first instance where we're seeing some very direct productivity gains is actually just automating the mapping. And just to kind of codify that a little bit, it's like this is mapping that could take, when you're talking about thousands of fields between dozens of different systems, can be weeks and weeks, if not months of work that you're reducing to, a tenth of that, let's say. Yeah. You still have to do the upfront business analysis and make sure you're mapping the right things in the right ways, but a lot of it is then automated from that point onwards.
It sounds like a very large game of Tetris, honestly. Just kind of making sure pieces fit and move them around.
But I think that's any organization that isn't standing still, right? Again, I think people get inside their own heads a bit too much. And again, going back to what I was saying about people feel like other organizations, other people are moving faster than them. It's just a feeling, right? I mean, again, people are actually pretty bad at quantitatively demonstrating that. Again, going back to the ROI question. So like people are nervous, people are scared, people are worried about the disruption that they feel will be coming. I think you need to internalize that and figure out how you're going to turn that around and actually be the disruptor fundamentally. Because if you feel that things are happening around you and you don't understand them, then the best way to understand them and figure out whether you are moving faster or slower than other people is to figure out how fast you're moving, benchmark, and then go on from there and figure out what you're going to do about it.
Hopefully the revolution.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, why not, right? I mean, otherwise it becomes a bit of a bystander game. It's like, do you want to be a passive participant in this sort of space or do you actually want to help lead it? I think that's one of the most exciting things about any technology kind of shift is nobody knows how it's going to play out, right? I think we saw this with the move from, the very traditional kind of systems, mainframes, et cetera, to PCs and servers and then to the web and then to mobile, et cetera. It's like every single time, and remember, this happens every 10 to 15 years, right? So you should expect it at this point that every 10 to 15 years, there's a big technology shift and everybody rethinks everything, right? And now we're kind of entering into this age of AI native, right? Like, what would my company look like if I just started again? Like, is it easier? It's like a lot of these existential questions of like, why is it hard to do integration? Why is it hard to change technology? Well, because you have a pre-existing set of stuff that has to be changed with it. And no one understands it. It was poorly documented, blah, blah, blah. It's just like all these problems. But like if you started again, would it be quicker? It's what developers always ask themselves when they're looking at a large code base. Is it quicker to change this thing or is it quicker to rebuild it? I think that, again, as you say that at a kind of application level, but you could also ask the same question at a company level.
You said every 10 to 15 years, we see something big pop up that kind of changes things as a disruptor. But with AI being as big as what it is, it will be interesting to see how that changes everything moving forward, all the big disruptors that we see from here on out.
It's an interesting thing to think about, right? Like we're in the age of AI. It's undeniable at this point. Is it going to be 10 to 15 years before the next thing comes along? I think it's going to be more AI. Like I think it's always like nobody predicted. In fact, people never predict the next wave of technology transformation, right? People always have this inkling that something's coming, but like they never know exactly what it is, and the way it plays out is never exactly how people thought it would either. So like it's an impossible thing. Like without a crystal ball, it's impossible to determine like what's going to happen. I mean, it's like even within the space we're in right now, with just looking at how the last 3 or 4 years played out. I was talking to somebody earlier. It's just like Christmas 2023. I created Christmas cards of the dogs wearing hats and scarves, right? And that's where we were at with generative AI back then, right? Trying to fool the bots, trying to get them to wrap themselves in knots and argue against themselves. A lot of that's gone away, right? And here we are now. Even in the last 12 months, we've gone from doc generation and research assistants and various other things to much more in-depth conversational building of everything, right? Is that going to continue? Well, yeah, I think so. And I think the people talk about the kind of holy grail of this kind of AGI, like artificial general intelligence, right? But the fact that these systems are now training, teaching on one another and learning from one another to improve themselves could cause exponential improvement. I mean, that's again, if you believe everything that you read, which I would encourage people not to, because we all read what we're made to read today, the way the algorithms work. So if you like reading about all the doomsday scenarios, then you will read a lot of that. If you try to break out of that and read the positive stuff, it's actually pretty interesting. So will it be 10 to 15 years before we see the next thing? And what the next thing is, who knows?
It could be happening right now and we don't even know it.
That's right, yeah.
Right. Data quality is often described as the prereq that has to be solved before AI can be useful. But most institutions are sitting on fragmented, inconsistent data scattered across dozens of systems. How is AI helping to solve that problem? And is it a bit of a chicken and the egg situation?
I think it is a bit of a chicken and egg. I think understanding, like there's a difference between data and information, right? So you have a lot of data, but if you don't understand it, then it's unlikely for anything else to be able to do a perfect job of understanding it either. So organizations that have a lot of semantic understanding and description of the data that they hold are going to be at an advantage. In the same way as what we've seen just in the last couple of years, organizations who've moved to an API kind of driven style of integration versus a batch file-based, CSV file, et cetera, extracts from core and all this kind of stuff, which has been around for 20 years, are at a disadvantage, right? Because the folks who are doing that, when you look at a CSV file, it doesn't really convey that much information, right? It's just a bunch of data and you have to understand it versus a schematized data with very rich descriptions, which, the AI tools will eat up, right? And they'll be much more accurate in the work that you ask them to do. And the same with APIs. I mean, I think this is one of the sort of misunderstandings almost, that the way all of these tools kind of work and the way they automate things is usually through actually the APIs that applications themselves expose, right? So it's that way when I talk about, the components of an integration platform traditionally, that kind of workflow, that orchestration piece is kind of the interesting piece that the LLMs are kind of doing for you now, because they're essentially orchestrating all of this work done by these different systems, but they're doing it in the same way as you would kind of do it yourself. They can just do it more quickly. But it has to start with a better understanding of the actual information you're holding to make sense of it. Because otherwise it's kind of one of these garbage in, garbage out problems. Yes, it'll make good guesses, but they could still be wrong.
So financial institutions are sitting on enormous amounts of consumer and operational data, but collecting it and actually trusting it are two very different things. How does AI help institutions move from just storing data to acting on it with confidence?
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-on from a previous answer that you do have to understand it. I think there's two important aspects of just information generally. There's kind of there's provenance and lineage, right? So provenance is like, where did it come from? What was the origin of that data, right? Like that's where trust is formed, right? If it came from something you didn't trust, then you can't trust the steps it has taken through since, which is the lineage, which is like, how has that data evolved and changed over time, right? How many different steps has it gone through before it got to me? If you don't understand either of those two things, then you probably can't trust it. It's just as simple as that. So it becomes a kind of a mapping again in the organization about like, where's the data generated? What's the origin of it? And then what are we doing with it to understand the quality of that data? Because if you have poor quality data, you're probably going to get poor quality decisions made on that data too, right? And you can't trust the decisions that are made. It seems really simple, but like it's kind of true, right? Yeah. It has to be.
Which also is a good point of why we still need people, humans, and bodies in these positions to map that and find out where it's pulling from. Real-time data visibility used to require significant technical infrastructure. How is AI normalizing that, making it accessible to institutions that don't have large IT teams?
It's a tricky question to answer. So I think the key words kind of democratization is actually, in my opinion, really cool. Like, I think all of the journey that we've been on with IT and with modernization and with just improvements to this entire ecosystem of software and tech is democratizing it itself. Going back to, I mentioned, Microsoft Word and Office earlier, that democratized a lot of work for a lot of people, right? And it actually is expansionary. And again, I think this is the other thing that people are forget. And there's lots of, again, conversation around Jevons paradox. If you kind of know what that is, like if you make something cheaper, people use more of it. They don't use less. It doesn't always, or it doesn't stay constant. I think there's some truth in that. And I think like all arguments or all kind of comparisons, it kind of falls apart. In terms of technical infrastructure, I don't know how AI is democratizing that right now. I think it democratizes access to the tools to get more things done more quickly. I think real-time data visibility is still a problem because it's still rooted in systems that simply weren't designed to provide real-time visibility. The banking world is still primarily batch, which usually results in daily extracts of core data and from other systems. And there's lots of reasons for that, which aren't going to be solved tomorrow, about why you're always looking at yesterday's data. So if you really want real-time data visibility, you really need a real-time organization, which means all of the systems need to be real-time with it. And what that means specifically for a financial institution is that from this point onwards, every single system you implement or replace should be real-time at its core, right? Fundamentally API-driven, ability to emit events, right? I want to know when something happened because reporting is such an after-the-fact thing to be paying attention to, like what happened in my organization yesterday, last week, last month, whatever. You can only ever look at trends, and the trends aren't necessarily predictive of the future. So if you want to get really good at predicting the future, you need much more up-to-date data. The technical infrastructure fundamentally has to change in your organization to actually drive that real-time visibility. I think AI then comes along for the ride because it then becomes an enabler to get faster insights, a better understanding of all of that happening, and allowing you to make changes to the organization more quickly because it is built on that foundation instead of a legacy foundation.
It's just two areas that are just really working together there.
Yeah.
Well, Jon, we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
So we've talked about problems, progress, the real promise of AI and integration. If you had to distill all of it into one fundamental shift you want leaders to walk away with right now, what would it be? Not to put you on the spot.
You are putting me on the spot. I think that's the point. I think you need a solid foundation. I think I kind of reiterate what I just said. I think you've got to look at the foundations of the technology you're currently using and whether they're going to be suitable for where you want to be 5 years from now. I think this is where horizons and the eras of computing really start getting compressed. I don't think you can wait 10 years anymore. You can't wait to see how this plays out like people did with the internet and how much online kind of access do I need to provide my customers. It's like, no, you need to figure this out now. So no one should be making decisions on replacing or modernizing technology unless it exhibits the characteristics that are necessary to actually take advantage of AI. And that comes down to integration fundamentally, because as I said, integration is driven, through AI, is driven from APIs, is driven from systematic access to machines. It's like, I don't think anybody really wants to go down the path of the AI typing into screens on applications. It's just like it's much more efficient, much more accurate for it to actually go at the integration layer, the API layer to these systems. So really think about the investments you're making and whether they're the right ones to actually for AI to take advantage of, not just people.
Jon, at the beginning of the episode, you said that you have always been a tech guy. How much are you loving this AI era that we're in?
Like everybody else, I'm both amazed and I guess maybe a slight amount of worry, right? I think we've all been there before in different ways. It's just the speed at which it's moving is actually one of the most extraordinary things. I think we have we have been able to do things that we simply would not have been able to do without it. So that's where we're at on our journey. And what I see and what I feel when I kind of use this stuff, and what I hear from others in my company that are using it, this is a lot of fun. I think the thing that people always forget, because they never had time, so they never had to think about it, is going back to what I said earlier about are we entering this world of perfect software? It's actually, you now actually have assistance to create something much better than you could ever have created, given the time constraints that you had. It's always a compromise. Like software, to ask any software engineer, it's always a compromise. Whatever you ship, it's always a compromise. You're never 100% happy with it, because you always run out of time, and you always get forced to ship something. Like, we may be leaving that era of imperfect software, which I think is really exciting, because now you get to really do the things that you always wanted to do, because you can move much more quickly.
And everybody has their own little personal assistant to help with that.
Well, whatever it is, honestly, it's just like, I think you're going to see a ton of innovation for things being done that couldn't be done because of the effort involved. The manual human effort of doing it is now a solvable problem.
Jon, this has been a very interesting and fascinating conversation, and I know that we've only scratched the surface. Thank you for breaking down what's happening in the integration space right now and where AI is making a real difference. Stay tuned for part 2 of my conversation with Jon, where we shift the lens to governance and risk and the future with AI.